reflecting in our worship on our church's mission statement. And that is work that we continue and we bring to an end today. And someone other than me must truly be in charge, because you can't make this stuff up. You can't imagine how perfectly it lines up. As you'll see if you flip to the back of your bulletin, our church's mission statement, in bold is the last section of the mission statement, which we are reflecting on this morning. And it says that we are called to be faithful proclaimers of the gospel of Jesus, collectively and individually, in God's world. What better day to reflect on that passage than Easter Sunday, when our stories contain examples of people proclaiming this good news in the only ways that they know how. We first turn to Luke chapter 24, verses 1 through 12, and we hear of Easter morning, the first time, and we are mystified by it even today. But on the first day of the week, at early dawn, they went to the tomb, taking the spices which they had prepared. And they found the stone rolled away from the tomb, but when they went in, they did not find the body. While they were perplexed about this, behold, two men stood by them in dazzling apparel. And as they were frightened and bowed their faces to the ground, the men said to them, "Why do you seek the living among the dead? Remember how he told you while he was still in Galilee, that the Son of Man must be delivered into the hands of sinful men and be crucified, and on the third day rise." And they remembered his words, and returning from the tomb, they told all this to the 11 and to all the rest. Now it was Mary Magdalene and Joanna, and Mary the mother of James, and the other women with them, who told this to the apostles. But these words seemed to the apostles an idle tale, and they did not believe them. Well, it's written elsewhere that Peter alone was at least intrigued by the news of these women, even though he didn't believe them. And he went running to the tomb, and he looked in the tomb and saw nothing but ragged clothes in the tomb. And he was amazed at what he found. And sometime later, Peter shared the good news in this way in Acts chapter 10, verses 34 through 43. Peter opened his mouth and said, "Truly I perceive that God shows no partiality. But in every nation, anyone who fears God and does what is right is acceptable to God. You know the word which he sent to Israel, preaching good news of peace by Jesus Christ. The word which was proclaimed throughout all Judea, beginning from Galilee after the baptism which John preached, how God anointed Jesus of Nazareth with the Holy Spirit and with power, how he went about doing good and healing all that were oppressed by the devil, for God was with him. And we are witnesses to all that he did, both in the country of the Jews and in Jerusalem. They put him to death by hanging him on a tree. But God raised him on the third day and made him manifest, not to all the people, but to us who were chosen by God as witnesses, who ate and drank with him after he rose from the dead. And he commanded us to preach to the people and to testify that he is the one ordained by God to be judge of the living and the dead. To him all the prophets bear witness that everyone who believes in him receives forgiveness of sins through his name." The word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God. The celebration of Easter is about waiting. It's about the not knowing. It's about the thing that couldn't even be expected. It's the unthought of, the unimaginable. And discovering it has already happened. how do you get your news? I feel like I'm a pretty plugged-in person. I tweet, I'm on Facebook, I Snapchat from time to time. I have favorite podcasts and radio shows. There's blogs and newspapers and magazines that I enjoy reading on a regular basis. I have a gym membership now, so at least a few hours every week I'm staring at cable news and taking that in. I feel like I'm pretty informed about what is happening in the world. And let me tell you this, very little of it is actually news. Only since the beginning of the 20th century, not even 100 years yet, has the word news referred to the nightly news program or the daily newspaper. The original meaning of the word comes from the word gospel. And it literally means new thing. Most of what we consider news in our culture is not only repetitive. I feel like I've seen the same headline dashed up in a bunch of different ways, displayed across every screen and paper I've come across in the last several weeks. But it is certainly not new. Stories about terrorism and violence, blustery would-be emperors and charismatic leaders, environmental concerns, and questions about how we should face our future. These are very old things. This is what humans have been wrestling with since the dawn of humanity. They are the things that have defined us. You can get a lot of information about the world from the news, but if we're turning to the news for answers to our big questions, the news industry does not have that to offer us. If we are looking for the answers to our problems in the news of the world, then this morning we should hear the voice that the women heard at the empty tomb. Why do you look for the living among the dead? On Easter Sunday, we celebrate the only truly good news there is. God is doing a new thing. And the new thing that God is doing can be very difficult to perceive. So difficult that even when the first Christians heard the good news, they didn't believe it. The group of women that had journeyed with them this entire time, who had heard the teachings of Jesus and left their homes, in an age where it was against the law for women to talk to any man that they weren't related to, they left everything they knew to follow this teacher. They watched him die. And they spent an entire Sabbath day sitting alone, having no idea what to do next. The new lives they were promised had been laid to rest with Jesus. Now they had to deal with the aftermath of their decisions. They would have to go back home to whatever might face them there. But first, they would go and anoint his body. They would show him kindness and respect, the kindness and respect he was not afforded at the end of his life. But there is no body there. Their immediate reaction to this is fear, terror. What could this mean? Then the messengers come and say, "Why do you look for the living among the dead? He is risen." And they rush back to the 11 apostles. They cannot even contain themselves. They have to share this news. He's not dead. It's not all over. In fact, it's just begun. And these 11 men, these 11 disciples, Jesus' closest followers and best students, they look at these women and they say, "Nah." When we celebrate the miracle of Easter, we are not celebrating a particular belief. In the Easter story itself, the founders of our faith refuse to believe what the women are telling them. We celebrate good news, regardless of who believes, regardless of who denies. Peter is the only one who gets curious, and he goes running to the tomb. Peter, who Jesus had called the rock on which I build my church, Jesus' go-to guy, the same guy who denied even knowing the man when he was put to death. As Peter runs to the tomb, he has to be hoping for a chance to set things right, a chance to be forgiven by his beloved teacher who he failed so miserably. Maybe it's not too late for him. Maybe he doesn't have to go down in history as the guy who abandoned and denied his beloved Jesus when he needed him most. He gets to the tomb, he finds it empty. Only the cloths the body had been wrapped in remain. Peter doesn't get angelic visitors. Jesus himself doesn't appear before him. It's just an empty hole in the ground with some tattered rags. And Peter is amazed at what happened. When we celebrate the miracle of Easter, we are not celebrating proof of our faith. It isn't an event we can point to and say, look, see, here's proof that our religion is so much better than yours. Peter wasn't amazed by what he found. He was amazed by what was missing. In the stories to come about Jesus appearing before the other apostles, he always looks like someone else, or he appears in shadow, or he vanishes just as quickly as he appeared. The apostles themselves didn't believe the news when they heard it. And the experiences they go on to have are not any more convincing than the story shared by the women. We celebrate good news, even when it is mysterious and difficult to understand. Sometime later, Peter will stand before a crowd of Gentiles, the first non-Jewish people seeking to be baptized into the faith, and Peter proclaims his good news. He tells of everything he knows of the works of Jesus, what it has taught him about God, and he declares God shows no partiality. No matter who you are or where you are on your journey, our God is for you. The one who denied knowing Jesus on Good Friday goes out to lead the charge in spreading the good news of his resurrection, of God's victory over death and destruction. He tells his story proudly and confidently and passionately without ceasing. Even when sharing this news gets him imprisoned, even when sharing this news leads to his own death. When we celebrate the miracle of Easter, we are not celebrating an end to our troubles. If anything, it was Easter morning that brought trouble to the disciples. Jesus was gone, but on Easter Sunday, his followers became convinced that there was still work to do. And the next time the world wanted that work to be put to an end, it was the disciples they would deal with. The work they took up was Jesus' work, sharing all they had, breaking bread together, demonstrating the power of God to the world, loving their neighbors as themselves. It is work that transformed the face of the earth. We celebrate the good news, even though it is rarely easy or convenient. The Easter celebration is the celebration of the good news. God is doing a new thing on the earth. We might not yet perceive it, but it's already happening. German theologian Paul Tillich wrote about God's new thing. It is hard to perceive. It appears in remote corners of our souls, which we have neglected for a long time. It shows a way where there was no way. It appears when and where it chooses. We cannot force it and we cannot calculate it. Readiness is the only condition for it. This is why we tell our stories. This is why we gather together in the sanctuary and we celebrate this good news, because we need practice. We come here to practice being ready to receive God's new work in the world. What do we call this new thing? How do we know it when we see it? As Tillich wrote, it's called love. Love is the power of the new in every human and in all history. Friends, you are loved. This is why we celebrate. This is the good news, and it is the only thing that remains new, so new that it has the ability to renew our souls and reinvigorate our purpose in life. It invites us to do the only work that has ever truly transformed the world, loving and serving one another. You are loved. No matter what you have done, no matter what you have failed to do, no matter your mistakes or your misgivings, each day is a chance to serve and love again. You are loved. No matter your belief or your unbelief, no matter how you were born or where you have journeyed, this work is available to you. You are loved. And even if you have been defeated, humiliated, if you have failed, or if you have given up, I have for you good news. God is doing a new thing. It's right now. It's already underway. It is yours to discover in your ordinary, glorious life. And it's your news to share with a world that badly needs to hear it. Thanks be to God.